We all face temptations of all sorts, and the truth is, sometimes we give in to them and feel terrible about it afterwards. We just want to get the temptation out of our minds and never think about it again. Other times, we give in, but we don't necessarily think that it's that big of a deal when we do it. I mean, what is it that causes us to want to do things we know we shouldn't do in the first place? And is there anything that we can do about that? So let's talk about it, but not just through my own thoughts and opinions. Instead, I want to go back a couple thousand years and share a real experience that can help all of us when we face temptation. It may come as a surprise to you, but Jesus actually experienced temptation as well. Yes, the guy that some of us believe is actually God in human form was tempted to do things that were not right. It's also true that he never gave in to temptation once. Instead, he lived a perfect life. Here's what that means. Temptation is not bad. Everyone experiences it. In fact, if you've ever been mad at yourself or annoyed for feeling tempted about something, here's what I can tell you. Jesus isn't mad at you. He's been there, and he wants to help. As we look at Jesus' story as it was written by one of his closest friends, Matthew, we see one of the first things we need to deal with when it comes to facing temptation. Check this out. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. You have Jesus feeling hungry, like me before Taco Bell, 40 days without eating. The temperature was really hot, and the tempter was taking over. This tempter is later referred to as the devil, and it makes you wonder what Matthew is talking about because there are several different images that come to mind. Maybe you hear that and think about the spooky guy from Halloween movies or the little dude sitting on your shoulder telling you what to do and what not to do. But the devil, the enemy of all things good and holy, honestly, it's been debated about what that means. However, that isn't as important as knowing the Greek word Matthew used when he wrote down this verse many years ago, and it meant tempter. And that's important because we all face tempters. Maybe we wouldn't call it the devil, maybe we would, but there's a lot that could fall under that category. A friend who tries to convince you to do something that you know you shouldn't do. An ad or a picture that catches your eye and causes you and your mind to wander. The voice of temptation that pops into your head and urges you to do something that you know is wrong. We all know what it's like to feel a nudge from the tempter. And what's odd is that thousands of years after Jesus was tempted, that voice of temptation often takes its first shot at tripping us up by using the same tricks. It tempts us not by focusing on what we are doing, but focusing on what we believe about who we are. And here's what I mean. Just before Jesus faced these moments of temptation, God literally spoke and said this. God affirms Jesus' identity as valuable, accepted, and loved. But when the tempter approaches Jesus, he says, "If you are the Son of God." The first thing that the tempter questions is Jesus' identity. If he can get Jesus to forget who he is, then maybe Jesus will forget how much he matters. If the tempter could get Jesus to forget how much he matters, then maybe Jesus would do something he wouldn't normally do. In reality, this plays out with you and me when we are tempted as well. If you think, I'm never good enough for my parents, so I'll never be good enough for anything. Who cares when I mess up if it's my future? Why should I even try? I'm not popular and no one really likes me, so I'll treat people badly so I can feel better about myself. I'm not really worth much, then I'll use my body like it's not worth much, because at least hookups feel valuable in the moment. I'm not a bad person, then I also may think that I deserve bad things, or it makes sense for me to do things that aren't good for me. But on the flip side, if I think that I matter, I'll make decisions that protect my future. If I matter, I'm a good person, I'll aim for good actions. I have a part to play in God's plan for the world. I'll work hard and find opportunities to serve others. Here's the point. Who I think I am changes what I do. What I think is true about me influences what I do. That's why temptation starts by trying to convince us that we are something that we're not. All of us have something that we've wrestled with going on between who God says we are and the thoughts that say the exact opposite. It's challenging to make sense of what's true versus the lies that come from the tempter. That's why it's so important to choose to believe God and to believe that He knows what's best for us than believing that we know what's best. In other words, let what God says about you influence what you do. This isn't just about feeling better about ourselves. For many of us, what we think about ourselves spills into our actions. How we see ourselves is either building up our lives or tearing our lives down. Of course, controlling those thoughts is easier said than done, right? You can't control every thought that pops into your brain. That's why I think another writer and leader named Paul, who had his own life-changing encounter with Jesus, writes this. This means that we can actually take hold of those tempting, urging thoughts, whether they are coming from our own minds or from things that we've said about ourselves. And we need to remind ourselves of what God says is true instead. So how do we do this? Here are a couple of steps that you can take to get started. Think about what you think about. Pay attention to your thoughts and what you are tempted to believe about yourself. You don't have to believe negative things people say about you, and don't just let unhelpful or unhealthy thoughts stay in your head. Instead, choose to pay attention to what's going on in there. Then, replace what's untrue with what's true. A great place to find what's true is in Scripture. The stories and words written by people whose lives have been shaped by God can be helpful reminders of what's true about you. You can also turn to a small group leader, a landing leader. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we have that, because everybody needs someone who will remind us of what's true and good about us. We all have our doubts about who we are and how God made us. But for a moment, imagine if those thoughts aren't true. What if you're not bad, worthless, shameful, broken, or stupid? How would your life be different if you stopped letting lies about your identity influence what you do? What would your internal conversations look like? Listen, this isn't just a high school thing. Temptation is a human thing. We're all tempted to do things when we know better, and oftentimes we give in. It's because our minds have convinced us that we're not who God says we are. This week, I want you to imagine how your life would look different if you let God say what He says about you and believe that it's true. If you let God say about you, if you let what God says about you influence what you do, your life will be changed forever.